Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name's Kate. I'm joined by my friend Andrew, and for this episode, we're going to be talking about The Batman and everything unique about the film. Andrew, with The Batman, would you say that it's one of the best Batman movies ever made, in the live action at least?
Yes, simply enough, yes. I would argue top three. I mean, we could go round and round in circles discussing, what's the best of all time, but this is definitely a very good movie, and it's definitely one of the best live action Batmans.
Oh yeah, for sure, definitely top three. But yeah, why don't we just go through everything that's so great about the movie and why it is one of the best Batman movies ever made. So first off, one of the best things about the movie is definitely the storyline. And that's because for the first time, we got a noir detective story for a Batman movie. And that really isn't something that we've seen to the full extent in a Batman film, at least in the live action. We've had detective elements before, obviously, but for this, it really became the focus. Why do you think that is, though? Why do you think we've never seen a full-on detective story?
That's a good question. I don't entirely have a great answer for that. Maybe it's just because, yeah, I don't really have an answer for that. Why we never had more of a detective focused Batman movie. I would argue we definitely got that with the Arkham games. Yeah, I don't really know why that never really translated to the big screen until now. Maybe it was just kind of a thing where, I mean, at the time, superhero movies as a whole were a much bigger thing than they are in the last couple of years. So maybe that kind of shifting in the general tone of what the public liked and was going to see kind of allowed a more detective focused his story to work and be successful. But yeah, I don't really have any kind of like one concrete reason for that.
No, yeah, I understand. But yeah, I think that when it comes to the story, the plot of this movie definitely makes it one of top three Batman movies, in my opinion. And that's because, again, it is a noir detective story and a mystery. And the plot includes so many fascinating layers to it that make it so compelling. We have Riddler in the movie as the main villain, which is perfect for a detective story, especially Batman. And the movie also portrays him as more of a serial killer, like the Zodiac killer, which makes perfect sense for a character like the Riddler, and it works so well with the mystery plot. And I think that his mission to expose the city's corruption, it not only ties to the city's crooked GCPD, but it also ties in with the mob. There are just so many unique elements to this movie and to the mystery. And there are also fun elements that are explored in other noir detective films, when they use serial killers or the mafia or corruption. They're all fun elements that work in noir detective films, and especially in this movie.
Indeed. One thing I really like about this movie is how it does manage to kind of weave multiple plot threads into it. You've got uncovering the corruption in the GCPD. You've got the uncovering the not the Falcone family. What was the other major crime family that got taken down?
The Maronis.
The Maronis, and how that seemed to be not as people thought it was. And then you've got Riddler in the background. You got Catwoman and her own motivations.
Yeah, it does have so many great threads to it, and it's so fun to explore all that. And one thing that I actually did enjoy seeing was the Wayne family connection to the mystery and how it connected to Carmine Falcone and the mob. Because usually Thomas Wayne specifically is portrayed as being this very noble billionaire who wanted to help Gotham. And I think he still is that way. And because he made that mistake with the mob, with Carmine Falcone about wanting to protect Bruce's mom, making sure that journalist didn't expose anything. I think what's nice about it is because he made that mistake, I don't think that it totally destroys the image or the legacy of the Wayne family. It just shows that it isn't perfect. And that's not entirely a bad thing. But also, another thing that's unique about this movie, and we've covered this in some of our other reviews, specifically for Logan, what's so great about this movie is that it's more than just a superhero movie. Like when we said with Logan, Logan is a lot like a Western film with superhero characters in it. With the Batman, like we mentioned earlier, it's a detective film with Batman in it or with superhero elements to it. And it's also a psychological thriller. It's a contemporary mob epic. It's so many things that make it like a detective story or something else before a superhero film. And that's so unique about it.
Yeah, and the fact that it manages to do all of those things well is also something that it warrant definitely needs credit for because that's a lot of hooks in the kitchen at one time, shall we say. And the fact that they don't manage to spoil the broth and have the detective aspect or the psychological thriller aspect or the noir aspect overshadow the other ones is a sign of good writing and it's a sign of good directing. And this movie has both because of the fact that it does manage to juggle all of those aspects fairly well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of credit for that definitely goes to Matt Reeves, the director.
Yeah, this was a very good. I feel like he was a very good match to direct a Batman movie, which makes it all the more ironic that it seemed like he was on board to direct, and then he wasn't, and then he was, and then he wasn't, and then he was, and then it finally came out.
And one thing that I give him credit for, and the other writers involved with the film, is that when it comes to the story, this movie manages to juggle so many different villains without overstuffing the movie. Like, for instance, like we were mentioning with the Riddler, Riddler's obviously the big bad of the film, and his goal to expose the city's corruption, I think, is actually a really fascinating motive because I don't think he's a stereotypical villain in this movie. He's not just bad for the sake of being bad. He has an interesting motivation, and it's also something that stays really true to his character because to him, Gotham's corruption is one giant puzzle that needs to be solved. So that was fascinating to explore with his character.
Yeah, and I really, really like how Paul Dano played him because it's a very different interpretation of the character of the Riddler, but yet it's also not at the same time. What I mean by that is we still have the main idea of how what the Riddler is, the ultra intelligent criminal mastermind who has his own motivations for what he does. But we have a very different presentation on how he goes about doing that because not only he's in this movie is Riddler presented as this incredibly intelligent, incredibly calculating, detail oriented, almost OCD criminal, but he's also presented as this completely unhinged anarchist, which is a bit more akin to, say, Heath Ledger's Joker than other interpretations of the Riddler that we have seen, how few we have in at least Batman films. I know we've seen quite a bit of that in animation form and cartoon, etc. But it works really well, and Paul Dano manages to pull off both sides of the coin perfectly. I don't think he gets nearly enough credit for his performance as the Riddler in this movie. He really does. In my opinion, this is almost as good as Heath Ledger's Joker. And I know that is very high praise to give, but I stand by it. And also, I mean, you got to give credit to the fact, a major chunk of his, big evil plan actually ended up working. He exposed the major amounts of corruption in the Gotham PD. He exposed that the Wayne family wasn't completely squeaky clean as they presented themselves to be. Obviously, they weren't completely in bed with the mob, but they did have some more connections than they wanted the public to know about. And, he did succeed in flooding Gotham. He didn't succeed in killing everybody, him or his followers, thanks to Batman and Catwoman stepping in. But yeah, again, you got to give credit to a villain who actually does accomplish their goals to a certain degree. That's why Thanos was such a great villain.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think other than Riddler, you also have villains like Carmine Falcone and the Penguin. So the cool thing about Carmine Falcone, while he's not exactly the big bad of the film, he's more of an overarching villain, and he's responsible for most of the film's events. And what's unique about it is that he's sort of an unnecessary puppet master in some way because of how he basically orchestrated everything or is responsible for it. And then you have the Penguin. Now, Penguin doesn't have a huge role in the film, although when he's on screen, he's definitely doing his job, and Colin Farrell was fantastic in the role. And what I liked about Penguin in this movie, despite not having a huge role, I think that he still factored into the story well because of his involvement with the mob and also his desires to work up the ranks, which is ultimately what he's going to do next.
Yeah, Colin Farrell did a really good job portraying this. You can tell he definitely wants to be the big boss in this movie, but he isn't. So as a result, he's kind of stuck just being somebody else's ass kisser at this moment. But you can also tell that he wants to be the man in charge. He wants to be the man at the head of the table in the big chair, shall we say. But you can also tell that he is smart enough and cunning enough and also weaselly enough to get there eventually. He just is biding his time and he's waiting for his opportunity, which he now has. And whenever the Penguin series comes out on HBO, which I believe is that next year or is that a 2025 project?
So far, I think it's next year.
I'm sure we will get to see quite a bit more of that as Penguin rises to kind of become the new head of the mob aspect of Gotham. Again, another part of this movie was the seeming shift from Gotham being controlled by the mob to being controlled by the rogues gallery that we started to see the primordial phases of.
Yeah, of course. And another thing that I think is done really well is definitely Catwoman. Catwoman's role in this movie was something that I really liked. I loved how, usually Catwoman shifts between the hero and villain, and usually she's more of an anti-hero. And this movie does a great job portraying her as an anti-hero. And her own motives tie into the plot very well, and they tie in with Batman's mission. And I think that it was a great way to utilize her because she wasn't the Catwoman that we know yet. She wasn't the full-on Catwoman that we've grown to know. And I think that that was a good thing to explore with her character.
Yeah, I mean, her motivations are a little bit more altruistic than, say, some of the other versions of Catwoman we saw, like the one that from Arkham City springs to mind, where she really was just more interested in looting Arkham Cities for its treasures. But this one, she's got her girlfriend she's desperately trying to find. Her methods are just a little bit more brutal than say Batman's, and I think he recognizes that, and I think that's something that he kind of reflects on and kind of changes throughout the course of the movie, which is actually one of my favorite aspects of this film. What I think makes it so unique is that we get to see a younger, brasher Batman. The example I always go back to with this is at the start of the movie when the clearly going to be Joker minions at some point in the distant future gang shows up and attacks the guy on the subway. Batman comes out of the darkness and is a little bit more brutal and ruthless with his violence than a more experienced Batman would be. Just the once he's already on the ground, like, oh, I'm going to continue bashing his skull in. And I think that, again, he's only been Batman for so long. He's still getting used to it. He's still trying to figure out what's the best course of action when it comes to being Batman. Do I need to be ultra violent? Do I need to be, or can I pull back a little bit? That's something we've not really seen before, because at least with the Dark Knight trilogy, that was, in Batman Begins, that was an origin. But he had that couple of years where he was out in the world kind of experiencing it, sort of getting trained by Ra's al Ghul. So he was a lot more experienced by the time he came back to Gotham and became Batman. And then we didn't really see that at all in the Burton movies. So I just really liked that we got to finally see what a younger, brasher Batman would look like on the big screen.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, before we really talk about Batman as a character in this movie, one other thing that I wanted to bring up that I do like about this movie in terms of the story, I like how it doesn't have to be an origin story. That's usually something that people might expect in the first superhero movie. But yeah, what I mean is the movie doesn't have to include the murder of Bruce Wayne's parents, and instead they just hint at it, which I liked. That was a smart move on Matt Reeves' part because at this point, most people kind of already know what Batman's backstory is, and they didn't really have to, I guess, shove it down our throats in that way. Instead of having the story take place at the very beginning of his career, it's been 2 years for him. And despite not being at the beginning, it's still early on. The movie leaves a lot of room for him to develop throughout the course of this movie and the rest of his franchise as well.
Yeah, no matter how long that may last, I feel like we're going to continue to see Batman evolve into the little bit more of the more experienced Cape Crusader we got in, say, The Dark Knight or in The Dark Knight Rises.
But yeah, speaking of Batman specifically, one thing that this movie definitely nailed was just Batman himself. One thing that I loved was the fact that Batman was actually the focus. And, this is kind of an issue, I'm not going to lie, that I have with quite a few of the Batman movies. With a lot of them, I feel like Batman hasn't really been the focus. I think a lot of them have focused more on the villains. So it was nice to see this movie actually focus on him. And another thing that I thought was unique was we spent more time with Batman than Bruce Wayne for a change. Most of the movies tend to focus a little bit more on Bruce Wayne, but for this, we actually got more of Batman, which was nice to see. And it was kind of refreshing too.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising that it took us, 40 something years to get to that point, but it was finally nice to see because, and I know this is a 3 hour movie. Batman in costume is on screen for easily two plus hours of it,
Yes.
maybe even 2.5. I would have to go back and actually look at the actual statistics, but yeah, that was a nice change of pace.
Yeah, and I think another thing that was really nice is this Batman actually was a detective. And I mean, detective elements were definitely explored in some of the previous movies, and we obviously saw that Batman was smart in those movies. But for this one, he really felt like a detective character, and he actually felt really smart. And that was really nice to see. And the film really acknowledges how inexperienced he is, despite being smart. I think that he's a good detective in the movie, but he's not exactly a great one yet. Because you got to remember something. It's only year two. He shouldn't be the best detective he can be yet.
Yeah, I mean, he makes mistakes. He didn't, or he was convinced that Penguin was the rat. That didn't turn out to be the case. He didn't discover Riddler's plot to blow up the levees and flood the city until after it happened. Yes, he was still able to prevent the massacre of Gotham citizens, thank God, but he missed some major clues that were put in front of him. Again, he's not perfect yet. So again, he's still, I don't want to use the term wet behind the ears because I mean, has been doing this for a couple of years, but he's not as good as he will eventually be.
Yeah, and that's actually a complaint that a lot of people had with the movie. People were disappointed that we didn't see the world's greatest detective like we know from the comics. But for me, people who say that missed the whole point of the movie. The whole idea is that he's only been around for 2 years. Why would he be the best Batman that he can be already?
Yeah, and I don't really understand how people got that confused. I know certain sects of the population had some very, very weird, wrong opinions about this movie. I'll go out and say it, but yeah, no, just I don't know. You're not going to please everybody, but some people really just completely missed the mark on what this film was trying to do.
Yeah, and another thing that I thought was nice was if you look back at the movie, I think both Batman and Bruce Wayne each have satisfying arcs throughout the movie. With Batman, with his arc, it's about becoming more than just vengeance. He becomes a symbol of hope instead. You can see throughout the movie, Batman has consumed his life. However, when he learns of the impact that vengeance has had on the city, specifically with Riddler and his following, Batman realizes that he needs to be more than vengeance. He needs to be a symbol of hope, which is usually what he is for the people of Gotham. So that was a satisfying arc. But also, I know that Bruce isn't in the movie as much as Batman, but he has a similar arc, but in a totally different way. Because, throughout the movie, we see that he's given up on being Bruce Wayne and that he's just solely committed to being Batman. And as the story progresses, we see how he evolves. Like we see how the relationships that he has with certain people, specifically Alfred and Catwoman, with that, Bruce becomes more honest with what he's afraid of, specifically in that scene with Alfred at the hospital when he admits how afraid he is to lose the people he cares about. And again, that's really nice because Batman isn't usually the most open person in the world. And in a way, while Batman learns how to become more than just vengeance, the movie is also about Bruce rediscovering his humanity, which was really nice to see.
Yeah, I think another aspect is he knows Batman is capable of helping Gotham as a city, but I think over the course of this movie, he realizes that Bruce Wayne is capable of doing that too. And I think that was something he kind of needed to discover and see firsthand because for a good chunk of this movie, Bruce Wayne is kind of presented as this very sort of jaded shut in. But the fact that he finally does realize that, yeah, I can do good with both of my personas, I think was a nice little character arc for him to go through. And I think we'll see that expanded on when they do Batman Part 2 in 2025. I just think it was a nice, again, I don't want to use the term nice change of pace because that's kind of become my catchphrase on this channel, but it really is because every other time we've seen Bruce Wayne, we've seen him as the Bruce Wayne everybody knows, the ultra rich playboy. I mean, if I had to choose, I would say Christian Bale probably did that the best. But yeah, it was a nice, it was a different way to show the character. And it makes sense when you think about it too, given Bruce's very tragic upbringing and kind of sort of like just a young man who doesn't really have to worry about money, but he has nobody really to kind of put him on the right path. And when you got nobody to guide you, you tend to kind of just lock yourself in the dark.
Yeah, and apart from that, something else that they really nailed very well with Batman's character, and also two other characters, I loved his dynamics with Gordon and Catwoman. Now, here's what I mean. So, first with Gordon, I think that this movie, I still think Gary Oldman is the best Jim Gordon, but I think this movie had the best dynamic between Batman and Gordon that we've seen in live action. It truly felt like Batman and Gordon from the comics, but it also felt very reminiscent of the animated series from the 90s as well.
Yeah, where Gordon is very clearly the last good cop in the city, and I think Batman recognizes that. But in this movie, you kind of get to see them sort of kind of have to get used to each other, kind of feeling each other out. Like, can we really trust each other, or are you just another dirty cop, or are you just another violent killer? Again, it was just kind of more of a bit of a rugged feeling out process between two characters.
Yeah, and what I also liked is throughout the movie, Batman and Gordon themselves felt a lot more like these two detectives in a classic noir story trying to solve a mystery together. That was really unique about the film. It really did feel like these two detectives trying to solve a case together.
Indeed, it did. Yes.
So that was definitely really great. But also, Batman's dynamic with Catwoman, that was also one of my favorite things about the movie. So, compared to the other Batman and Catwoman dynamics, like in Batman Returns and Dark Knight Rises, well, those were fine. This one felt the most special because for me, it felt the closest to the comics. I think that with a lot of Batman movies, you have Catwoman in this movie who's essentially his love interest, but she's also her own character. And I think previous Batman films, not all of them, but I think some of them have kind of struggled with love interests, and that's not something that this movie struggles with. Catwoman works so well in the movie because she's not just a love interest. She's her own character. She has a backstory, she has a motivation, and she has a reason that makes her factor into the story. And their relationship to me felt a lot like the heart of the movie, or at least something along that line.
It really did because I get the dynamic that Batman really wants to be with her, or to be with Catwoman in this movie, and he does trust her, eventually builds more trust with her over the course of the movie, and eventually completely trusts her by the end. But just the method she uses and the fact that she's not doesn't fully reveal who she is and keeps secrets from him, I think is what keeps them from fully being together at the end of the movie. Like, yes, there is some trust there, but there's not like there's how do I want to put this? It's not like there's some deep wounds that need time to heal because that's not really what's going on here. But it's like there's still some shades of gray that need to sort out, if that makes any sense.
No, yeah, it does. And that's one of the things that I liked about the ending. I like how Catwoman never found out who Batman was, how she never found out it was Bruce Wayne. And I say that because she hasn't met Bruce Wayne yet, and I'm guessing that's what the next movie will be. I think that if she had found out who he was in this movie, it wouldn't have been as satisfying, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think actually, I think I finally figured out how I want to put this. Like, they both have very different opinions on what Gotham is. Batman sees it as a city that still can be saved. I think Selina believes it's a little too far gone. And I think that dynamic is what's keeping them apart for the time being.
Yeah, and one thing that's always been great about Batman and Catwoman's dynamic in the comics and everything else, I think Catwoman is arguably one of the most important Batman characters ever. And part of this is because she's one of the few people who can actually humanize Bruce Wayne. And this, I think, relates back to what we were saying earlier about how the movie is partly about Bruce rediscovering his humanity. So I think she progressed that very well.
Yeah, it something that Catwoman has always been able to do, regardless if we're talking comics, animated series, the Arkham games, the '90s movies, the '80s movies, is that she's always able to provide some shades of gray in Batman's black and white world, and that's especially in this movie because she is a criminal, but she does have good reason, good motivations for it. She wants to get out of Gotham. She wants to escape with her girl. She wants to find her girlfriend and escape with her. But her methods are a little bit more out and out criminal as opposed to vigilante esque.
Yeah, agreed. But other than the dynamics, another thing that works incredibly well with this movie, and I know you agree, Gotham City. Gotham City in this movie, this might be the best Gotham City that I've ever seen in the live action films. What Matt Reeves and Greg Fraser and James Chinlund and the entire crew were able to pull off with this movie, they just did such a flawless job making Gotham City look like how it was supposed to be. They captured both the grunginess and beauty of Gotham. And because of that, Gotham in this movie really felt like a character. It wasn't just a setting. It really was a character of its own, which was special.
Yeah, it really does breathe. And I agree. This is the best Gotham we've ever gotten in a movie. Tim Burton's Gotham was decent, but you could still, it kind of can't really describe it, but it had that Burton feel to it that you'll see in the sets of his other movies, be it Edward Scissorhands or Nightmare Before Christmas. It had a Tim Burton feel to it. Joel Schumacher's Gotham never felt a little too cartoony, but apparently that's kind of because that's the direction they wanted to take the movies anyway. Was a little bit more cartoony and family friendly, which okay, sure. And then when it comes to Christopher Nolan's Gotham, that's actually the one, weirdly enough, I think I like the least, just because it doesn't really feel it doesn't have anything that makes it stick out. It just looks like any other rundown American city. You could have told me it was New York and I would have believed you. You could have told me it was Chicago and I would have believed you. And again, I can't tell if it's just the lighting or the set design or the cinematography, but this movie just makes it feel like it really is the Gotham from the comics. It's a city that has roots in old money, but is really downtrodden. And when things started to turn, the crime swept in and took over.
Yeah, and I think that because of the fact that it also feels like a character, it's what makes Batman's motivation to save it feel even stronger.
Indeed, because I mean, he would have probably had to have seen that firsthand, see the city, go through that downturn.
Yeah, and one last thing that I think we should talk about, this is just one of the best things about the movie, in my opinion. I love the inspiration and faithfulness that the movie has to the comics. One in particular, and this is a movie that we've covered based on a graphic novel, that is Batman: The Long Halloween. So The Long Halloween obviously had a huge inspiration on the film, and although it explores the same type of concept, a serial killer targeting people connected to the mob, the plot isn't really an exact copy of the or an adaptation of Long Halloween. Both stories do a great job incorporating multiple villains. They each play a significant role, but the whole plot overall isn't an exact copy of what Long Halloween was going for.
Yeah, I mean, Long Halloween, number one, that was very much a Two-Face origin movie. I don't even think they even mention Harvey Dent in this movie. But the idea of a serial killer who comes out of Batman's rogues gallery or is connected to it in some way, taking out the corrupt figures of Gotham. I mean, that was a hell of a good plot to pull from, but it is different. You know, it's not a direct adaptation. This one, they're taking out the Gotham PD and all the corruption in there and the corruption in the high ranking official. Whereas in Long Halloween, they were taking out just the mob guys. So it was inspired by Long Halloween, which was a great source to draw from. But it didn't just adapt Long Halloween or copy it. It did make some significant changes, but still kind of kept the backbone.
Yeah, and another comic that I do like it how it adapted from was a comic series called Batman Earth One. Now, the part where it sort of inspires by that is in that story, it explores Martha Wayne's connection to the Arkham family. That was something that the comic explored. And although I'm not saying that this is something that should be adapted or explored in every Batman continuity, I actually really like the idea of Bruce essentially being a member of the Arkham family. And other than that, another comic that I think was cool that they adapted was a comic called Batman Zero Year. So this is another story where Batman's battling the Riddler, and in that story, Riddler does also cause a flood in Gotham, but his motives are a lot different, especially during the third act. You know, Riddler's motivation in the comic was much different. It was essentially that story arc was kind of a reimagining of the No Man Land comics, which was where Gotham was hit with an earthquake and essentially turned into a wasteland, which Nolan partly adapted in The Dark Knight Rises. But what I look at it as is it's not exactly, you know, like with Long Halloween, it's not a direct copy. It's just inspired and it explores it in a totally different way.
Indeed. And there's a lot more really good Batman comics for Matt Reeves to draw from, and I look forward to seeing what he does next. I wouldn't mind if he drew inspiration from, say, Killing Joke for his hook for Batman Part 2. Again, I wouldn't do a direct adaptation because that is, I would argue, the most famous Batman comic series besides maybe The Dark Knight Returns. So maybe don't do a direct adaptation. Do what you did here. Keep kind of the backbone of it, but develop your own story in the same vein.
Yeah. And I think that no matter what, whatever Matt Reeves and Robert Pattinson and the whole team explores in the sequels, however many we get, if they're able to recapture what they did in this movie, I'm definitely looking forward to where they take it. I'm sure, you know, I have a feeling it probably won't be more noir detective stories because as much as I loved it in this movie, I think that the sequels, it'd be a good idea to explore different storylines other than just repeatedly doing detective stories all the time.
Yeah, no, because that would get really, really a bit repetitive really quickly. So
Yeah, agreed. All right, guys, I think that that's the end of this episode. Thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
also, just a heads up, We're Talking Movies is now on Threads and Instagram with Twitter and Facebook, hopefully coming in the near future. If you're looking to follow us, we don't have too much of a presence on there right now, but we are planning on increasing that in the future. So please look us up at We're Talking Movies, all one word, on Instagram and Threads. Thank you very much. And thank you to all our subscribers.
Yeah, thanks so much for listening, guys. We'll see you later. Thanks. Bye.